Hello, and welcome to History on Blast, episode 19, Purveyors of Immorality. In today's episode, we're going to put Anthony Comstock on blast for not believing in fun, and also fairly successfully putting back the technology of contraception by quite a lot. But first, this month in history. On February 3rd of 1870, the 15th Amendment was ratified, which guaranteed the right of citizens to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Of course, at this point, citizen was defined as all males born or naturalized in the United States. It also didn't include women, Native Americans, or Chinese immigrants. Between this, poll taxes, and other obstacles to voting, it would truly take until 1966 before most people could vote. Even now, people face other challenges to their right to vote, and not everyone even exercises it. But we are a lot closer than we were in 1870. Okay, so let's talk about Anthony Comstock. He was born in 1844 in the town of New Canaan, Connecticut, which is probably about as religious as it sounds. His mother was a Congregationalist, and she was extremely devout. She died when he was only 10, but he believed. And her faith was, let's go with fire and brimstone. And from that, he formed most of his worldviews, which, remember I said he was born in 1844, so that puts him as a young adult when he marches off to the Civil War to fight in the Union, and he, like many others, believed that he was going to fight the good fight, and then he got stationed in the relatively peaceful area of Florida, where he really didn't see any fighting, but instead what he did see was a den of vice and iniquity, because he discovered that, gasp and shock, our soldiers use tobacco, they drink alcohol, they gamble, and by goodness, they have make a habit of pornography. He was scandalized, to put it simply. He joined a group known as the Christian Commission, which was created by the Young Men's Christian Association, aka the YMCA. Yes, that. YMCA. Yes, them. But infinitely less cool and hip and like 70s gay men's culture, and much more actually a Christian association at this point in history. And this commission was trying to use the government and laws to force soldiers to be moral. 'Cause I guess if you're gonna spend all day killing people, you're not allowed to get drunk after, because that's immoral. We'll just take a minute, let that sink in. Okay, we good? Alright. 1873, we get what is known as the Comstock Act. This was one of several acts, several laws that were put in place to deal with obscenity. The first one was put in 1865, also by the Christian Commission, and the Comstock Act strengthened this, and it made the definition of what was considered obscene quite a bit broader. Originally, it only stopped them from mailing obvious pornography. But Comstock, who doesn't believe in fun, or, I guess the right of women to choose what happens to their own bodies, also decided that information about abortion or contraception was indecent. Thanks, Comstock. You set us back quite a bit. So then, he also managed to somehow get medical textbooks added to the banned list. Yes, you heard me. Medical textbooks. Because they also displayed a lot of the things that were being covered in the information on contraception, abortion, and pornography that the bill banned, like human anatomy, like you would find in a medical textbook. Good job. He did do a few good things. I will give him points for the fact that he was also, the Comstock Act would also, stop, get-rich-quick schemes and counterfeiters, fake securities, fake land rights, and he also attacked, fake medical cure-alls. Which is really wild, because on one hand, he's like, I don't know if you're allowed those medical textbooks, but I don't think your snake oil works. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy there, and that's okay. He continued this crusade until 1915, when he died. He was actually a special agent for the post office department. And it wasn't until 1965 with Griswold versus Connecticut that the last piece of the Comstock Act came down. Yeah. Along with his fantastical crusade against fun and the autonomy of the female body, Comstock also took some time in 1872 and 1883 to pen books. These books were titled Frauds Exposed and Traps for the Young. I feel like that second one really encompasses his message. It spoke to parents, teachers, and ministers and warned them of the peril of dime novels and advertising. Which, okay, I can kind of see where he's coming from on advertising. If you look at the modern advertising industry, it is a nightmare of things being sexualized that should not be sexualized, like chocolate and milk. It's very weird. But we're talking about the 1800s when, okay, sure, you were selling your coffee with a painting of a naked woman, sure, why not? But, like, we were also fighting a war, and in the ravages of war, there were much worse things going on at this point. And, honestly, Comstock is one of those people who deeply bother me from a standpoint of what he said was immoral was what everyone had to accept was immoral, regardless of their personal beliefs, and he was imposing a specific religious view on everyone, and also completely ignoring the fact that people were actively fighting and killing each other, but that's okay. But condoms are the devil, I guess. Now, of course, I can't discuss Anthony Comstock without talking about Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was a nurse who worked in New York City. She worked predominantly with the poorest women in the city, and she ended up writing a pamphlet called Family Limitation. The purpose of this is probably fairly obvious when you look at the name, and basically what she was writing about was birth control. And the idea here was that she was trying to avoid having her patients resorting to back alley abortions because they're not safe. Quickly clarifying here that at the time, the abortion was illegal, so you couldn't go and get one at a hospital or from any sort of licensed doctor legally, and there wasn't such a thing as Planned Parenthood, so you couldn't just go there. And they really weren't safe. A lot of people, because of how they had to be handled, without, in a lot of cases, without a real operating environment, without that kind of sterilization, because they were just doing them wherever and hoping that the person doing it had any kind of medical training, a lot of women died. So she was trying to avoid that for her patients, and that's why she wrote this. And in January of 1915, her husband, Bill Sanger, was arrested by Comstock for distributing this pamphlet. This was actually Comstock's last court case before his death. And Bill Sanger was convicted and spent 30 days in jail. Because, and I quote, Justice McInerney, I think I said that right. In my opinion, this book is contrary not only to the law of the state, but to the law of God. If some of these women who go around advocating women's suffrage would go around and advocate women having children, they would be rendering society a greater service. Which, oh boy, there's a lot to unpack right there when you have a justice of the court system talking about the law of God in a courtroom. Need I remind you all, dear listeners, of the thing we like to call the separation of church and state. They didn't believe in that in the 1800s, I guess. So that's pretty much the deal on Comstock and the Comstock laws. Basically, he was an asshole who didn't believe in fun, or bodily autonomy, or really much of anything other than fire and brimstone Puritan religion. He was very much a product of his time, but he is also a lesson to those of us in the modern day. Looking back, you can look at this guy and go, oh, wacky, wacky Puritan man. Or you can look at him and see the roots of the religious conservative movement that we have today that still looks to ban this kind of thing, despite the safety of the people involved, despite the, independence and bodily autonomy of the people involved, despite the simple concept of things like freedom of the press and free speech. Okay, freedom of the press might not apply. Actually, I'm not totally clear on that one. And how it involves publication laws, I am not actually all that well versed in the Constitution, and I'm sorry. I probably should have researched it, but I didn't. Whatever. But the idea, either way, is that of what to look out for and what not to do. Don't be Anthony Comstock. And with Valentine's Day right around the corner, it's just a couple days away, I want you all to just think back and raise a glass to the court cases that overturned the Comstock laws that mean that we all get to have fun this February and enjoy ourselves. Well, that's just about going to do us for this episode. So, as always, if you have any feedback, comments, questions, anything, you can contact me at historyonblast@gmail.com or at historyonblast on Twitter. You can also join our Facebook group. There's going to be a link down in the show notes. As always, I'd like to thank Defy Them All for the use of their song Keeper of Histories for the intro and outro of our program. And always, thank you for listening.